by 6:30 on the morning of the 3rd of October, 1859. Clementina Elmhurst had already found a dead woman's clock in a duke's house. Stoneleigh Hall still held the muted hush of an aristocratic household before breakfast. Fires were being coaxed awake behind closed doors. Servants moved softly along distant passages, and the eastern windows of the long gallery showed only a pale grey beginning of day. Clementina stood alone except for Mrs. Hale, the housekeeper, before a walnut long-case clock that should not, by any reasonable account, have been standing in Sussex under the ownership of House Winterbourne. Her Grace said you were to have whatever access you required, Miss Elmhurst, Mrs. Hale murmured. Clementina inclined her head. Thank you. I'll disturb nothing. I cannot replace exactly as I found it. She wore a dark travelling gown, despite having arrived the evening before, and steel-rimmed spectacles rested low enough on her nose that she could look over them when necessary. At 33, she had long ceased pretending not to notice when people stared at the spectacles first and at her second. Miriam had never cared. Her aunt had once said that a woman who could see clearly ought not to apologize for the inconvenience it caused everyone else. The memory came now because Clementina was looking at a repair no sensible guest would ever have thought to examine. The lower door of the clock stood open. Inside, beneath the polished dignity of walnut and brass, 2 butterfly-shaped plates had been fixed across an old split in the wood. One wing of the left plate had been filed slightly narrower than the other. Clementina did not touch it. She did not need to. That's the same shape, she said quietly. Mrs. Hale leaned nearer without crossing the space Clementina had left around the case. The same as what, miss? A repair on a clock that belonged to my aunt. She paused. Accuracy mattered more than relief. Or a repair very much like it. Miss Miriam Elmhurst had died in July. Her will had already been proved, and Clementina, as executrix, had inherited the small personal collection of clocks Miriam had guarded with more affection than she had ever shown the carpets or silver at Elmhurst Hall. 3 pieces had been listed in Clementina's memory with painful clarity. A bracket clock from Miriam's bedchamber. A French mantel clock Miriam disliked because it lost time in damp weather, and this sort of walnut long case, plain from a distance, remarkable only when one knew where to look. At least 2 had disappeared before Clementina could complete the inventory. Sir Leopold Elmhurst, her first cousin, had answered every inquiry with polished irritation and no useful explanation. Then, 2 weeks ago, the Dowager Duchess of Norchester had mentioned in a letter that Stoneleigh had recently acquired a handsome walnut long case from a Lewes dealer. Clementina had not accused anyone. She had asked to see it. The Dowager had invited her to Stoneleigh. That was all. Yet now the old split ran where Clementina remembered it, and the brass butterflies sat across it like something lifted intact from memory. She bent closer. Aunt Miriam complained that the plates were too pretty for something no one sensible would ever look at. Mrs. Hale smiled faintly. That sounds as if she expected someone to look. She expected me to. A sound came from the far end of the gallery. Not a servant's soft tread. A man's step, measured and unhurried, accompanied by the sharper click of a door closing behind him. Mrs. Hale straightened at once. Clementina did the same. One hand still holding the lower clock door open. Lewis Winterbourne, Duke of Norchester, had returned to Stoneleigh after midnight from London, several hours earlier than his grandmother expected. Clementina did not know that. Lewis did not know that the unknown woman in his East Clock gallery had been invited by the Dowager Duchess. What he saw was simpler. A woman he had never met stood before an open clock case at dawn, spectacles on her face, the housekeeper hovering nearby, and one of Stonele's newest acquisitions exposed beneath her hands. He stopped. Clementina turned. He was taller than she had expected from the portrait in the west stairwell, dressed in a dark morning coat, with the restrained neatness of a man who had been traveling but refused to look disordered by it. His expression was not angry. Anger would have been easier, it was certain. "Mrs. Hale," he said. "Your Grace." The housekeeper curtsied. "I wasn't aware we had admitted tradespeople before breakfast." Clementina felt the first sting of insult, but she kept her hand steady on the clock door. Mrs. Hale opened her mouth. "Your Grace, Miss Elmhurst is. I can see she's inspecting the clock." His gaze settled on Clementina. Not crudely, not even dismissively. He simply appeared to have decided what she was. "On whose authority?" Clementina answered before Mrs. Hale could. "The Dowager Duchess's." Something flickered in his expression, but certainty held. "My grandmother's generous with access. So I've found. And you are?" The question might have repaired everything if it had come first. Now it arrived too late. Clementina closed the lower door carefully until the latch rested exactly where it had been. Someone who'd prefer not to be accused before being introduced. Footsteps sounded behind the Duke. Lady Victoria Lovell appeared at the turn of the corridor with 2 guests from the previous evening, all 3 clearly drawn by voices, carrying through the gallery. Victoria's gaze moved from Clementina to the open inspection platform, then to Lewis. She did not smile. That made her attention worse. Lewis noticed the audience and seemed to interpret it as another reason to end the matter quickly. Mr. Pritchard, the butler, approached from the opposite passage. "Your Grace." Lewis did not raise his voice. He did not need to. "Throw her out before breakfast." Silence followed. Clementina heard every word as distinctly as she had seen the narrow wing of the brass repair. Lady Victoria lowered her eyes in a manner that suggested delicacy rather than embarrassment. One of the other guests shifted. Mrs. Hale went pale. Clementina stood very still. She had been corrected for speaking too precisely, advised to smile more often, told that spectacles hardened a woman's appearance, and once informed by an aunt by marriage that noticing household accounts was an unattractive habit in an unmarried woman. None of it had taught her how to become invisible. It had only taught her how to remove the evidence that she was looking. She lifted both hands to her spectacles, took them off, and folded them into their case. "Mrs. Hale," she said, "would you please have my trunk brought down?" The housekeeper stared at her. "Miss Elmhurst, Her Grace specifically." "I know." Clementina looked at Lewis. "I wouldn't wish His Grace to endure the danger of an unidentified woman near his clocks." Lady Victoria finally spoke. "I'm sure this is merely a misunderstanding." Clementina turned to her. There usually is when judgment arrives before information. Lewis's jaw tightened. For the first time, he looked less certain than he had moments earlier. Clementina did not wait for him to amend the order. She had already been made into a spectacle before witnesses. Remaining to negotiate the terms of her dignity would only make the spectacle last longer. She stepped away from the clock. At that exact moment, a cane struck once against the polished floor beyond the doorway. The Dowager Duchess of Norchester entered the gallery, wrapped in a dark mourning shawl, her white hair arranged with the severity of someone who had been awake long enough to hear more than she liked. Her gaze moved from Clementina's closed spectacle case to Lewis. Then to Mr. Pritchard. "Lewis," she said, "do you ordinarily expel my invited guests before learning their names, for the first time since entering the gallery?" Lewis Winterbourne looked as though certainty had abandoned him. The Dowager Duchess stood in the doorway, with one hand resting on her cane, her eyes moving from Clementina's closed spectacle case to her grandson's face. Behind Lewis, Lady Victoria Lovell and the two other guests had become very interested in the architecture. "Grandmother," Lewis said, "Miss Elmhurst was examining an open clock case at dawn." "Yes, without my knowledge. Most things in this house occur without your knowledge while you are in London." His jaw tightened. "You might have mentioned that you had invited someone to inspect the collection. You might have asked her name before ordering her removed." The rebuke landed quietly and therefore harder. Clementina did not enjoy watching him receive it. Satisfaction would have made the humiliation too communal, and she had already had enough of being observed. "Your Grace," she said to the Dowager, "I can leave without inconvenience." "You will do nothing of the kind." The older woman turned to Mrs. Hale. "Has Miss Elmhurst disturbed anything?" "No, Your Grace. She has been particular not to." "Has she attempted to remove anything?" "No." "Has she behaved like a tradeswoman sent to value a clock for sale?" Mrs. Hale glanced at Lewis before answering. "No, Your Grace." The Dowager looked back at him. "There. We have completed 3 minutes of inquiry and discovered rather more than you did in one." Lewis accepted that without defense. Clementina noticed the restraint. It did not erase what he had said, but it was the first useful thing he had done since entering the gallery. He looked at her directly. "Miss Elmhurst." "Your Grace, my order is withdrawn. That prevents the servants from carrying it out." His eyes narrowed slightly, not in anger but in recognition. "It does not repair the insult." "No." Lady Victoria shifted near the corridor. Lewis glanced toward the witnesses, then back to Clementina. "I will address that separately." Clementina did not answer. The Dowager Duchess moved into the gallery and gestured toward a pair of chairs near the windows. "Now that no one is being expelled, perhaps we may discover why Clementina was inside the clock." "Beside the clock," Clementina said. The Dowager's mouth twitched. "That is precisely why I invited her." Lewis did not smile. "You knew Miss Miriam Elmhurst. For more than 30 years, she had an excellent eye for objects and an appalling eye for men." Clementina almost objected on behalf of the dead, then decided Miriam herself would probably have agreed. The Dowager settled into her chair. "Clementina wrote to me after Miriam died. 2 of the clocks mentioned in her aunt's personal collection could not be located. When I happened to mention our recent acquisition from Lewis, she asked whether she might see it." Lewis turned to Clementina. "You believe this clock belonged to your aunt?" "I believe it may have." "That is not the same thing." "No." The answer seemed to catch him. Clementina continued. "Aunt Miriam owned 3 clocks of particular value. A small bracket clock from her bedchamber. A French mantel clock she disliked because it lost time in damp weather, and a walnut long case clock with old case repairs." Lewis glanced toward the long case. "The brass plates, among other things, and after her death, at least 2 of the 3 were missing before. I could complete the inventory of her personal effects. Who had access to Elmhurst Hall? Her household, family, servants. My cousin Sir Leopold Elmhurst had the broadest practical access after her death." "Was he executor?" "No, I am." Something changed in Lewis's expression, not belief, attention. "And the clocks were left to you?" "The small personal collection was." "Specifically?" "Yes. Then why not accuse Sir Leopold directly? Clementina looked at him over the folded spectacle case in her hand. Because access is not proof. The dowager gave Lewis a pointed look that he ignored. Did you ask him what happened to them? Several times. His answer? That household effects had been sorted during the confusion after Aunt Miriam's death, and that I was making too much of old furnishings. And you disagreed. I disagreed with calling property named in a will old furnishings. Lewis was silent for a moment. Then he turned toward Mr. Pritchard. Have Bell bring the August purchase ledger to the estate office. Clementina looked at him. Mr. Bell, my estate agent. Now, unless you would prefer I wait until after breakfast. There was the faintest edge of self-directed irony in the question. Clementina chose not to rescue him from it. Now would be useful. 10 minutes later, the scene had moved to the small estate office off the west corridor. Lady Victoria and the other guests had been politely dismissed by the dowager, though Clementina knew dismissal did not remove memory. Lewis stood behind a broad writing table while Mr. Bell placed a calf-bound purchase ledger before him. The estate agent was a careful grey-haired man who looked faintly alarmed to discover his morning involved disputed clocks and an offended guest. The long case acquired for the East Gallery, Lewis said. August. Bell opened to the relevant pages. Yes, Your Grace. Purchased through Mr. Nathaniel Crowther of Lewes. Clementina's fingers tightened around her spectacle case. She had heard the name before. Crowther. Lewis looked at her. You know him? I consulted him in 1857 regarding values, not a sale. For your aunt, for insurance. Lewis absorbed that without comment. Bell ran one finger down the account. Here, walnut long case, 8-day movement, repaired case. Purchased August 26th. Source? Lewis asked. Bell bent closer. Crowther's memorandum identifies the piece as received from Sir Leopold Elmhurst. Silence gathered around the table. Clementina did not feel triumph. She felt the colder thing that came when suspicion acquired a date and a name. August 26th. Miriam had been dead for weeks. Lewis read the line again. Does this prove Sir Leopold had no authority to sell it? He asked. Clementina appreciated the question precisely because the answer was inconvenient. No. Bell looked between them. It proves only that the dealer represented him as the source. And that Stoneleigh bought the clock after Miriam's death, Lewis said. Yes. Clementina opened her spectacle case. That is more than I had yesterday. She put the steel-rimmed spectacles back on. Lewis watched the movement, then turned to Bell. Until ownership is established, the clock is not to be moved. Yes, Your Grace, no internal cleaning, no repairs, no polishing beneath the lower case, no adjustment beyond what is necessary to keep the movement safely wound. Bell nodded. And Miss Elmhurst is to have access when she requests it, with Mrs. Hale or another suitable witness present. Clementina looked at Lewis. You are preserving evidence. I am preventing my household from making the situation worse. Those are occasionally the same thing. This time his mouth almost moved. Almost. Bell gathered the ledger, but Lewis stopped him. Leave it a moment. He turned the book toward Clementina. You should see the entry yourself. She stepped to the desk. The spectacles sharpened the small brown lines of ink. Crowther. August 26th, Sir Leopold Elmhurst. There it was, not accusation, not conclusion, a trail. She leaned closer. Her spectacle case, which she had set near the edge of the desk, shifted when her sleeve brushed it. The spectacles themselves slipped slightly down her nose as she straightened, and she removed them for a moment to adjust one arm. Without thinking, She placed them on the window ledge beside the ledger. A draught stirred the curtain. The spectacles slid. Clementina reached. So did Louis. Their fingers touched over the narrow steel frame. Neither moved for one startled heartbeat. The contact was barely anything, the brush of two hands reaching for the same fragile object. Yet Clementina became abruptly aware of how near he stood, and of the fact that his earlier certainty had vanished from his face. Louis withdrew first. He picked up the spectacles carefully by one arm and held them out to her. Yours. Yes. She took them without allowing their fingers to meet again. Thank you. I seem to be improving by degrees. Very small degrees. Cruel, Mrs. Elmhurst. Accurate, Your Grace. She put the spectacles on again instead of returning them to their case. Louis looked at her through the clear lenses, and something in his expression shifted into what might one day become respect, if neither of them damaged it first. The Dowager Duchess, who had observed the exchange from a chair beside the fire, said nothing. Louis closed the ledger. Mr. Bell, confirm whether Crowther still has his original stock records from August. Do not contact Sir Leopold. At once, Your Grace. Bell left. Clementina looked again toward the handwritten date. You still do not know that the clock was Aunt Miriam's. No. And you do not know that Sir Leopold lacked authority. No. Louis met her gaze. But I know that I was wrong about you before I had facts. And I have no intention of making the same error about him, merely because I now dislike the appearance of his name in my ledger. Clementina had not expected that answer. It was the first thing he had said that morning, which asked nothing from her, and concealed nothing about himself. She inclined her head. That seems wise. A devastating compliment. You will survive it. He looked toward the clock gallery beyond the corridor, then back at her. Miss Elmhurst, I believe I owe you rather more than breakfast. Breakfast at Stoneleigh was served at 8 precisely, and by then the command in the clock gallery had already become something larger than a private mistake. Clementina knew it from the way conversation thinned when she entered the breakfast room. Lady Victoria Lovell sat near the Dowager Duchess in pale grey silk, one gloved hand resting beside her coffee cup. The two guests who had witnessed the morning scene were present as well, along with several others who knew nothing, and therefore watched those who did. Louis stood at the far end of the table rather than taking his seat immediately. Clementina felt every glance that followed her to the chair the Dowager had reserved at her right hand. She had put her steel-rimmed spectacles back on and left them there. If society wished to remember her as the woman found beside an open clock before dawn, it might at least remember her accurately. The Dowager Duchess reached for the toast rack. Sit down, Clementina. Louis appears to have decided that breakfast requires a speech. Louis looked toward his grandmother. Only a short one. Those are usually the dangerous kind. A faint ripple of amusement moved around the table, then disappeared when Louis faced the room. He did not stand behind Clementina. He did not place himself protectively beside her. He stood where everyone could see him. Before we begin, he said, I need to correct something I said this morning. Lady Victoria lowered her cup. Clementina kept her hands folded in her lap. Louis continued. Miss Elmhurst is a guest of the Dowager Duchess and had her explicit permission to inspect a clock in the East Gallery. I did not know that when I found her there. His gaze moved briefly to Clementina, then back to the table. I issued an order before learning either her name or her purpose. The order was unjustified. The room stayed silent. If anyone heard it, he added, you may also hear the correction. Miss Elmhurst was where she had every right to be. One of the gentlemen murmured something approving. Clementina did not turn to see which. Lady Victoria did. Her expression remained composed. "It is very honorable of you to say so, Your Grace." Louis inclined his head. "It is accurate." Victoria's eyes moved to Clementina. Unfortunately, society has never been famous for remembering the second version of a story. The sentence was gentle enough to sound sympathetic. Clementina heard the edge beneath it. Louis did too. Then society will have to improve its memory. Victoria smiled. "You ask a great deal before coffee. I have made worse demands before breakfast." The humor was dry, but he did not use it to escape the apology. He took his seat only after Clementina had done so. That mattered more to her than she wanted it to. Breakfast resumed, though not normally. She could feel questions moving around the table like drafts. Why had she been examining a clock? Why had the Duke ordered her out? Why had he corrected himself so publicly? No one asked directly. In aristocratic rooms, curiosity often wore better manners than honesty. The Dowager Duchess directed conversation toward a proposed restoration in the South Garden. Clementina answered when spoken to and did not explain herself to people who had not earned an explanation. Louis spoke little. Once, when Lady Victoria made a remark about gentlemen acquiring objects without knowing how troublesome their histories might prove, his eyes lifted to Clementina's for a brief second. She looked back. Nothing passed between them that could be called tenderness. What passed was recognition. He understood the remark. So did she. Neither allowed Victoria to govern the table with it. When the meal finally ended, the guests dispersed toward the drawing room and morning rooms. Clementina expected to return upstairs and write to her solicitor. Instead, the Dowager Duchess touched her sleeve lightly. "Stay a moment." Louis remained as well. Mr. Pritchard closed the breakfast room doors after the last guest left, though the Dowager stayed in her chair near the windows, making propriety unnecessary to discuss. Clementina stood at the end of the table. Louis came no closer than the opposite side. "There is something more," he said. "I had suspected as much. My grandmother would say, that is because I have the subtlety of a carriage wheel." The Dowager lifted one brow. "I would say nothing so kind." Clementina almost smiled, but Louis's expression had become too serious. "The correction at breakfast does not undo the fact that people heard me order you from the house. No. Lady Victoria is unpleasantly correct about one thing. Reputation rarely obeys corrections as efficiently as gossip obeys scandal." Clementina felt the meaning before he said it. She straightened. "Go on." Louis looked at her steadily. "My words created a question about your presence here. They may create others, and I am responsible for that." "Yes." He accepted the answer without protest. "There is one way to remove the question entirely." Clementina stared at him. The Dowager Duchess became very still. Louis did not soften the words with sentiment. "Marry me." For a heartbeat, Clementina thought she had misunderstood. "I beg your pardon. I am asking you to become my wife. You met me this morning." "Yes." "You ordered me thrown out before breakfast." A faint flush reached the hard line of his cheek. "Also yes. And now, after breakfast, you are proposing marriage. I am aware of the sequence." "Are you?" The Dowager Duchess said nothing. Her silence made the room feel more private, not less. Clementina studied Louis through her spectacles. He was not amused. He was not flirting. Worse, he was sincere. "Why?" she asked. "Because my command exposed you to speculation under my roof. If the story spreads, my name will be attached to the insult Whether I like it or not, marriage would make the speculation irrelevant. Irrelevant to whom? Society. I see. Clementina folded her hands before her so that he would not see how suddenly cold they felt. Do you love me? Louis did not hesitate. No. The honesty struck harder than a graceful lie would have done. Do you believe I love you? No. Do you know anything about what sort of wife I would be? Very little. Do you know what sort of husband I would be? I had hoped my reputation might answer part of that. Your reputation ordered me out of your house before learning my name. The Dowager Duchess coughed into one hand. Louis's mouth tightened. Fair. Clementina looked at him for another moment. Would you be asking me this if no one had heard you this morning? That stopped him. She saw the answer arrive before he gave it. No. The room seemed to settle around the word. Clementina nodded once. Then marriage would be an apology in a wedding coat. I would rather have the apology. Louis stared at her. Not offended, not angry. Something closer to astonishment. The Dowager Duchess looked down at the table, and Clementina suspected she was hiding satisfaction. Louis drew a slow breath. You refuse? Yes. Without asking what settlement I would offer. Yes, without considering the advantages. I have considered the largest one. It would make everyone else more comfortable. And you? It would make me a duchess because you made a mistake. Clementina held his gaze. I have spent too much of my life being told to become more convenient for other people. I will not make a marriage out of the same habit. For the first time that morning, Louis looked away, only for a moment. When he looked back, the certainty she had first seen in the gallery was gone. Then tell me what you do want. Clementina had not expected the question. From you? Yes, she considered before answering, access to the clock while it remains disputed. Done. No repairs, cleaning, moving, or alteration without notice. No interference with my authority as executrix. Agreed. No private arrangement with Sir Leopold made in my name, whether you think it would protect me or not. Louis's expression sharpened slightly. Agreed. And if the evidence eventually proves I am mistaken, you will not hide that to spare me embarrassment. No. If it proves House Winterbourne benefited from something improper, you will not hide that either. The room grew quieter. This time Louis did not answer immediately. Clementina watched him understand the true cost of the condition. Then he nodded. Agreed. Even if it embarrasses your house, even then, even if it proves me wrong, even then. Something in Clementina eased, though she did not let it become trust too quickly. That is what I want. Louis rested one hand on the back of a chair, but he did not move toward her. You are very unlike anyone who has ever refused me. Have many women refused you? Until this morning, I had arranged my life so that the question rarely arose. That sounds efficient. I am beginning to distrust efficiency. Clementina allowed herself the smallest smile. Then she turned serious again. If I am mistaken, Your Grace, I intend to be the first person to say so. Louis looked at her for a long moment. And if you are not? Clementina thought of the brass butterflies hidden inside the clock, the August date in the ledger, and Sir Leopold's name written beneath it. Then someone has been relying on the belief that no one would look closely enough. 2 mornings later, Stoneleigh opened the East Clock Gallery for a small collection viewing that had been arranged before Clementina's arrival, and Louis refused to cancel it merely because the room had become inconvenient. By 11 o'clock, 6 guests had gathered beneath the tall windows, among them Lady Victoria Lovell and one of the gentlemen, who had heard the Duke's command before breakfast on Clementina's first morning. The walnut long case remained exactly where it had stood. No servant had polished beneath it. No repairman had been summoned. Even the old dust along the lower rail remained undisturbed. Clementina noticed all of this before she noticed Louis. He stood near the entrance, speaking with an elderly collector about a pair of bracket clocks. When Clementina entered beside the Dowager Duchess, his gaze found her immediately. He did not cross the room to escort her. He did not announce her as though she required his protection to stand among the guests. He simply waited until conversation reached a natural pause. Then he said, "Before we begin, one correction." The room quieted. Clementina felt Lady Victoria's attention sharpen. Louis looked at the same people who had witnessed the earlier humiliation. "Miss Elmhurst is here at the invitation of the Dowager Duchess, and with my full permission to examine the long case in this gallery. My command on the morning she arrived was made before I understood either fact. It was unjustified. No embellishment followed, no appeal for forgiveness, no attempt to turn apology into performance. One gentleman cleared his throat and bowed slightly toward Clementina. Lady Victoria smiled with practiced graciousness. How fortunate that such a small misunderstanding can be corrected so neatly. Clementina adjusted one cuff. Small things are often easiest to call small when they happen to someone else. Victoria's smile held. I only meant that an interest in household curiosities can place a lady in unusual situations. Objects rarely object to being examined closely. The Dowager Duchess concealed a smile behind her fan. Louis did not intervene. That pleased Clementina more than intervention would have done. He had corrected his own part. He did not now try to win hers. The viewing moved on, and after the other guests had been drawn toward a French mantel clock at the opposite end of the gallery, Clementina approached the walnut long case with Louis and Mrs. Hale. The housekeeper carried the key, though Clementina had never asked for it. That, too, was sensible. "Shall I open it, miss?" Mrs. Hale asked. "Please." The lower door swung outward. Clementina put on her steel-rimmed spectacles and crouched just enough to see the old split beneath the internal frame. The two butterfly-shaped brass plates remained untouched. Louis stood to one side rather than behind her. "Those are what you remembered?" "Yes. And you are still unwilling to call them proof." Clementina looked up. "They resemble what I remember. That is useful. It is not the same as proof." Louis nodded once. He did not ask the distinction again. Clementina appreciated that. She leaned closer without touching the brass. One plate had been filed narrower on the left wing. The other sat fractionally lower, as though the craftsman had corrected alignment after the first screw. Aunt Miriam used to complain that whoever repaired this sort of split had made the plates prettier than necessary. That sounds like a complaint she enjoyed repeating. She enjoyed most complaints she considered accurate. Louis glanced at Clementina. A family trait, possibly. The corner of his mouth moved. Mrs. Hale brought the small two-step inspection platform they had used before. Clementina climbed carefully and examined the upper case. Then the sides, looking for anything that might distinguish the clock from another walnut, long case of similar age. Nothing obvious appeared. The dial bore no helpful inscription. The movement was hidden behind its proper panels. She descended one step. Louis moved instinctively, then stopped before extending his hand. "Will you take my hand?" The question was simple. Clementina looked at him. He had already raised his arm halfway, but he did not touch her. He waited. Yes, she placed her hand in his. His grip was steady and restrained, enough to support her as she stepped down from the platform. The contact lasted only seconds. Still, Clementina noticed the warmth of his palm through her glove, and the fact that he released her the instant both feet were safely on the floor. Nothing in the gesture claimed familiarity that made it more intimate than a presumptuous touch would have been. "Thank you," she said. "You are welcome." Lewis glanced at the platform. "I am improving by degrees. Do not become complacent. Impossible in your company." Mrs. Hale turned away very carefully, though Clementina suspected she was hiding amusement. Clementina moved back toward the lower case. "There may be another place to look." "Where?" "Underneath." Lewis crouched before she could. Then he stopped himself and looked up. "Would you prefer to do it?" The question caught her by surprise. "Yes." He rose immediately. Clementina knelt on the carpet beside the base. Mrs. Hale held a small hand lamp lower, and Clementina leaned close enough that one steel rim of her spectacles nearly brushed the wood. At first, she saw only dust, polish residue, and the natural darkening of old walnut. Then a faint chalk line appeared beneath the lower rail. There. Lewis bent beside her, but kept enough distance not to crowd her. A mark. Possibly. A number. The chalk had been partly blurred by age and partly obscured by an old layer of polish that stopped just short of the underside. Clementina angled the lamp. The first visible character might have been a 7. The middle had nearly vanished. The final figure was clearer. 4, she said. "You are certain?" "Of the last figure, yes. And the first, no." Lewis waited. "Thank you for not turning that into certainty on my behalf. I am practicing." Clementina studied the mark again. The chalk did not look freshly applied. Dust had settled into the shallow grain around it, while the edge of an older polish line crossed one part of the writing. Someone marked the clock before it came here. "Can you tell when?" "Not exactly." She pointed without touching, but this polish edge lies over part of the mark, and the dust beneath the rail settled afterward. The writing is older than our inspection, and almost certainly older than the clock's arrival at Stoneleigh. Lewis looked toward Mrs. Hale. "Was the underside polished when the clock came?" "Not by us, Your Grace." Mr. Bell instructed the men to clean only the visible case. Clementina sat back on her heels. "Then it may be a dealer's stock number." "Crowther's?" Lewis asked. "Possibly, or an earlier dealer's. But if Crowther recorded the clock under a stock number, the ledger may tell us more than the description did." Lewis rose and offered no hand this time. Clementina noticed that too. He had asked once when she was stepping down from height. He did not turn the permission into a general license. She stood on her own and brushed one speck of dust from her skirt. Across the gallery, Lady Victoria was watching them. When Clementina looked up, Victoria smiled as though she had been caught admiring a painting. "Have you found something interesting?" "Perhaps." "How mysterious." "Only because we have not yet checked it." Victoria's gaze slipped to Lewis. "You are allowing Miss Elmhurst remarkable freedom with the collection," Lewis answered without humor. "It is not freedom to which she is not entitled." The words were quiet, but Victoria heard them. So did Clementina. Victoria turned away first. After the guests departed, Clementina returned to the lower rail with a sheet of paper and copied only what she could actually see: a probable first figure, several uncertain marks, and the final 4. She refused to complete the number from imagination. Lewis watched from the other side of the table. Most people would be tempted to guess the missing figures. Most people are often tempted into mistakes. And if Crowther has no matching number, then we lose a possibility, not the truth. Lewis considered that. You are very difficult to discourage. Clementina folded the paper. I have had practice. He looked at the long case, then at the copied mark in her hand. What next? Clementina tucked the sheet into her notebook. If Mr. Crowther recorded it, we stop guessing where this clock came from on the 4th day of Clementina's stay at Stoneleigh. The copied chalk figures lay between her and Lewis on a small walnut table in the sitting room adjoining the East Clock Gallery. The long case itself remained untouched, beyond the open doorway, exactly where House Winterbourne had placed it after purchase. Mrs. Hale sat near the window with a basket of mending, close enough to satisfy propriety, and far enough that Clementina did not feel watched. Lewis had brought the August purchase ledger, but Clementina had asked him to leave it closed. We already know what that tells us, she said. Crowther sold Stoneleigh a walnut long case on August 26th, and Sir Leopold's name appears as the source. Lewis rested one hand on the ledger cover, and we know there may be an older stock, number beneath the case. Maybe. You do enjoy that phrase. It prevents embarrassment later. I am discovering that embarrassment is not always prevented by caution. Clementina looked at him over her spectacles. No. Sometimes it is caused by certainty. He accepted the point with a slight inclination of his head. 4 days earlier, he might have answered with wit before thought. Now he seemed to consider whether a joke would obscure more than it revealed. Clementina noticed that change and deliberately returned her attention to the paper. She had copied only the marks she could distinguish beneath the clock. A probable 7, several faded strokes, a final 4, nothing more. If Crowther's records use the same number, we will have a commercial link, independent of my memory, she said. And if they do not, then we have lost one route, not the claim, not yet. Lewis leaned back. You said you had consulted Crowther before. In 1857, about Miriam's clocks, about their value. Clementina paused, then realized this was no longer a detail she could leave vague. I prepared a memorandum for Aunt Miriam that year. 3 clocks, descriptions, condition, estimated values, and the principal repairs I knew of. Lewis's attention sharpened, including the walnut long case. Yes. Where is the memorandum now? I do not know with certainty. She folded her hands. There were 2 written stages. I made working notes while assembling the descriptions. After Aunt Miriam approved the final memorandum, I destroyed the notes because they were no longer useful. And the final document, a household copy, remained with her papers at Elmhurst Hall. Only one surviving copy, as far as I know. Who had access to Miriam's papers after her death? Clementina's gaze lowered to the page, between them. I did as executrix, but not continuously. The house did not cease functioning because she died. Servants moved things. Family came and went. Sir Leopold had access. Lewis did not immediately say the name meant guilt. That restraint mattered. Did the memorandum authorize a sale? He asked. No. Did it contain prices? Estimated values. Enough for someone else to use if they wished to dispose of the clocks. Clementina looked at him. Yes. The admission was unpleasant, but truth did not become less useful because it was uncomfortable. Then, if Sir Leopold possesses that paper, Lewis said, he possesses something genuine that could be made to look more significant than it is. Clementina felt a chill that had nothing to do with the October air. A valuation is not an instruction. I know. Other people may not care about the distinction. Then we will make them care." The sentence came too quickly. Louis seemed to hear it himself. He corrected course before Clementina could. "No, that was badly put. We will establish the distinction. Whether anyone cares is their own failure." Clementina looked at him for a moment. "Better. I live for these lavish commendations." Mrs. Hale's needle moved steadily through linen. Clementina almost smiled. Then the old memorandum returned to her thoughts. She remembered sitting at Miriam's escritoire 2 years earlier, spectacles on, noting a crack in the long-case panel, while an older relation visiting Elmhurst Hall had laughed and asked whether anyone expected a lady to inspect furniture with the seriousness of a surveyor. That evening, before dinner, Clementina had removed her spectacles in her bedchamber. Before the maid could suggest it, she had eaten half the meal, unable to make out the expressions across the table. The memory arrived with such clarity that she took off her spectacles, now without intending to. Louis watched, but said nothing. She held them by one steel arm. "There was a time," she said, "when I became very skilled at doing this, before anyone asked." "Removing them? Yes. Why?" She gave him a dry look. "Surely a man with your understanding of society can imagine why." "I can imagine several stupid reasons. I would rather hear the correct one." Clementina turned the spectacles slowly between her fingers, "Because they made me look severe. Because a woman who noticed everything was tiresome. Because squinting politely was apparently preferable to seeing accurately." Louis's expression did not soften into pity. Clementina was grateful for that. "At one dinner," she continued, "I took them off before anyone could mention them. I could not see half the table properly. A gentleman later told me I seemed much more agreeable that evening. Because you could not identify him at a distance." The line startled a laugh from her. "Possibly. Then he was congratulating himself on poor visibility." "You make it sound ridiculous." It was ridiculous. His gaze moved to the spectacles in her hand. They preferred an easier view to an accurate one. Clementina looked at him. The words reached somewhere she had expected him to avoid. He did not tell her the spectacles suited her. He did not say, "She looked beautiful in them." He did something stranger and more respectful. He understood what had been taken from her. Louis placed his right hand on the table between them, palm upward. He said nothing. Clementina stared at it. Mrs. Hale continued sewing by the window, though her attention appeared entirely occupied by a hem that had not changed length for several minutes. Louis did not move his hand closer. He did not ask. The offer remained where he had placed it. Clementina set her spectacles carefully beside the copied chalk figures. Then she put her hand in his. His fingers closed around hers, slowly, without possession. The first intentional touch in the gallery had lasted only long enough to help her from the platform. This was different. There was no practical reason for it. That fact made her heartbeat suddenly louder. Neither spoke for several moments. Louis's thumb remained still against the side of her glove. He did not turn the contact into caress. Clementina found herself grateful for the absence of performance. "I became good at making myself easier for other people," she said at last. "I am beginning to think it was a poor use of skill." Louis looked at her hand in his, then at her face. "Will you object if I say something that sounds dangerously like advice?" "Probably." "Fair warning, then." His mouth shifted faintly. "Would you consider no longer making yourself half blind for the comfort of people who deserve to be seen clearly?" Clementina stared at him. "You are giving orders again." His eyes widened in immediate recognition. "Yes, I was." He considered for half a second. "Miss Elmhurst, would you consider no longer making yourself half-blind for the comfort of people who deserve to be seen clearly? The reformulation was so earnest that Clementina laughed, not politely, not quietly enough to disguise amusement. Louis looked absurdly pleased with himself. "I might consider it," she said. Their hands remained joined. The silence after laughter was warmer than the one before it. Clementina did not withdraw until she needed to turn the copied page. Louis released her immediately, with no visible disappointment. She put her spectacles back on. The room sharpened. So did he. "Now," she said, "Crowther, I can have him summoned." "No, no. I want to ask him in his own premises, with his own records in front of him. I do not want a frightened dealer arriving at a duke's house, wondering what answer the duke expects." Louis considered that without offense. "You intend to go to Luz?" "Yes, alone, with proper company. My grandmother can provide a companion, and my solicitor should come if available." "Agreed." He hesitated. "Do you object if I accompany you?" Clementina thought carefully. "Not if I ask the questions. You drive a hard bargain. You proposed marriage 4 days ago. A catastrophic bargaining error." She gave him a look. "You may come." Louis rang for a servant and dictated a brief note to Nathaniel Crowther, requesting an appointment for Miss Elmhurst regarding a clock previously handled through his business. At Clementina's insistence, the note contained no accusation and no mention of Sir Leopold. The reply arrived late that afternoon. Mr. Pritchard brought it to the sitting room on a small silver tray. Clementina broke the seal herself. Crowther would receive Miss Elmhurst the following morning. He requested discretion. Then, in a final line written more heavily than the rest, he added that Sir Leopold Elmhurst was not to be informed of the meeting. Louis read the sentence only after Clementina handed him the paper. "That is not proof," he said. "No. But it is interesting." Clementina put the letter down beside her spectacles. "Very." The road to Luz was still darkened by rain when Clementina left Stoneleigh on the 5th morning, though the clouds had lifted enough to show pale October sunlight above the hedgerows. The journey was scarcely 7 miles, but the narrow Sussex roads made speed neither comfortable nor sensible. Mrs. Armitage, a widowed cousin of the Dowager Duchess, who often served as a companion, sat beside Clementina. Mr. Harcourt, Clementina's solicitor, occupied the opposite seat with a leather document case resting across his knees. Louis sat beside him, and, to Clementina's private surprise, had brought no papers at all. "You know what you intend to ask Mr. Crowther," he said as the carriage left Stoneley's gates. "I do. Then I shall attempt not to improve your questions." "That sounds painful." "I expect to suffer." Mrs. Armitage looked out of the window with suspicious concentration. Clementina lowered her gaze to the closed notebook in her lap. The conversation might have invited laughter 2 days earlier, after the warmth of Louis's hand beneath hers the previous afternoon. Everything seemed slightly altered. Not more intimate, more noticeable. She was aware of how near his knee rested across the carriage, of the way he waited for her answer instead of assuming one, and of the fact that he did not mention their hand-holding at all. That restraint pleased her more than any gallantry would have done. The carriage reached Luz a little before 11. Nathaniel Crowther's premises stood on a respectable commercial street behind a narrow shop front, crowded with clocks, barometers, and polished wooden cases. A brass plate beside the door bore his name. Inside, the air smelled faintly of beeswax, paper, and clock oil. Crowther appeared from a rear office almost immediately. He was a compact man in his late 50s, with silver hair, brushed neatly backward, and the guarded expression of someone accustomed to other people attaching sentiment to objects while expecting him to attach prices. His eyes went first to Clementina. Recognition came slowly. "Mr. Crowther, you came to me some years to Crowther in 1857. Yes." He glanced at Lewis and bowed. "Your Grace." Lewis inclined his head. "This is Miss Elmhurst's inquiry. I am here because one of the clocks in question is currently at Stoneleigh." Clementina noticed what he did not say. He did not say the clock was his. He did not say Crowther was expected to answer him. The distinction mattered. Crowther led them into his office, where Mrs. Armitage took a chair near the wall, and Mr. Harcourt opened his case without producing anything. Clementina remained standing. "Mr. Crowther, when I consulted you in 1857, what did I ask you to do?" Crowther frowned in concentration. "You brought descriptions of 3 clocks belonging to Miss Miriam Elmhurst, a bracket clock, a French mantel clock, and a walnut long case. For what purpose?" "Insurance valuation." The answer came without hesitation. Clementina felt something in her chest ease. "Did I ask you to sell any of them?" "No." "Did Aunt Miriam?" "Not through me." "Did you receive the walnut long case at any time in 1857? "No." "At any time before my aunt's death?" Crowther's expression changed. He looked briefly toward Mr. Harcourt. "No." Clementina kept her voice level. "Did you receive it afterward?" The dealer was silent for a moment. "Yes." "When?" He rubbed one thumb against the edge of his desk. "August." "Can your records be more precise?" Crowther looked at Lewis, then back at Clementina. "They can." He crossed to a locked cabinet, removed a large stock book, and brought it to the desk. He did not push it across to them. He opened it himself. "The book remains in my custody." "Of course," Clementina said. Crowther turned several pages and stopped. "Here." Clementina moved closer. Mr. Harcourt came to her side. Lewis remained where he was until Crowther gestured that he might also look. The entry was written in a narrow commercial hand. "Walnut long case, 8-day movement. Repaired case, date received. 18th August, 1859. Clementina's eyes moved to the source column. Sir Leopold Elmhurst. Beneath the description was a stock number. The first figure was 7. The final figure was 4. The faded chalk marks she had copied from beneath the clock could not reproduce every character, but what remained matched what stood in the book. Clementina read the line twice before speaking. Sir Leopold arranged the consignment. "Yes." "Did he tell you the clock belonged to him personally?" Crowther hesitated. "Not in those exact words." "What did he tell you?" "That he had authority to dispose of several effects from Elmhurst Hall." "Did he mention that Aunt Miriam's will had been proved?" "No." "Did he mention me as executrix?" "No." "Did he say the clock had been left specifically to anyone?" "No." Mr. Harcourt made a small note. Clementina did not. She wanted to hear the answer before reducing it to ink. How quickly did he expect the clock to be sold? Crowther's mouth tightened. "Very quickly." Lewis spoke for the first time since entering the office. "How quickly?" Crowther looked at him. Sir Leopold emphasized prompt settlement from the beginning. He was willing to accept a lower return if the transaction did not linger. Clementina felt her attention sharpen. Did he explain why? "No. Did you ask?" "I asked whether there was urgency attached to the consignment. He said he was stabilizing household accounts after a death and did not wish to carry unnecessary property." The phrase sat uneasily in the room. Stabilizing household accounts. It was not a confession of debt. It did not establish dishonesty. It did reveal urgency. Clementina forced herself not to move beyond it. And Stoneleigh bought the clock through you. Yes, when? Later that month, Lewis said quietly. Our ledger gives August 26th. Crowther nodded. That would be correct. Clementina looked again at Sir Leopold's name. Would you be willing to make a formal statement concerning what you have just shown us? Crowther's caution returned immediately. Not today. Mr. Harcourt lifted his gaze. May I ask why? Because if Sir Leopold disputes my account, I become part of a property dispute between an executrix, a baronet, and a duke. I conduct business with families who dislike public complications. He laid one hand firmly on the stockbook. I will consult my own solicitor before I sign anything. Clementina nodded. That is reasonable. Crowther looked almost surprised. You think so? I have spent several days objecting to people deciding what the evidence means before they have examined enough of it. I am not going to demand that you act against your own advice, merely because your caution inconveniences me. The dealer's shoulders eased. Lewis looked at Clementina, and she caught approval in his expression before he turned it away. The original book remains here, she said. Yes, no page is removed. Certainly not. And if your solicitor advises that you may speak formally, I will send word to Stoneleigh and to Mr. Harcourt. Clementina finally opened her notebook and wrote only the facts she had personally seen. 18th August, Walnut Long Case. Repaired case, Sir Leopold Elmhurst. The matching visible portions of the stock number. Prompt settlement requested. Nothing about motive. Nothing about guilt. Crowther watched her write. You were like this in 1857. She looked up. Like what? Particular about distinctions. Value was value. Ownership was ownership. You corrected me once because I called the figures sale estimates. Clementina remembered. They were replacement and market estimates for insurance. Exactly. He gave a tired half smile. I remembered because no one enjoys being corrected by a woman young enough to be his daughter. You survived. Barely. Lewis's mouth shifted. Crowther closed the stockbook. There is one more thing. Sir Leopold pressed harder on speed than on price. He wanted the matter finished. That is useful, Clementina said, but it still does not tell us why. No, then we will not pretend it does. Outside, the town had brightened under a thin autumn sun. They returned to the carriage without the stockbook, without a signed statement, and without any new object in their possession. Lewis waited until they were underway before speaking. You could have pushed him. Yes, you chose not to. A frightened witness is more likely to agree too quickly or retreat entirely. You make patience sound aggressive. Sometimes it is. Lewis looked through the carriage window, then back at her. He confirmed the part that matters for now. He confirmed that Sir Leopold consigned the clock after Aunt Miriam's death, and that you were not identified as seller. Yes, and that Leopold wanted prompt settlement. Clementina shook her head slightly. That last fact is interesting. It is not yet an accusation. Lewis inclined his head. I stand corrected before I was wrong. Progress. Mrs. Armitage smiled openly this time. What none of them saw was the junior clerk, who stepped from Crowther's back room after the carriage had gone and spoke later that afternoon to a carrier who regularly served Elmhurst Hall. By evening, the fact that Miss Clementina Elmhurst had come to Lewis with the Duke of Norchester to examine Crowther's stockbook was travelling east through the same quiet household network that carried parcels, gossip, and accounts. Before nightfall, one of Sir Leopold Elmhurst's servants had heard it. By the following morning, Sir Leopold would know that Clementina was no longer merely asking where Miriam's clocks had gone. She had begun reconstructing exactly how one of them had been sold. Sir Leopold Elmhurst arrived at Stoneleigh late on the 6th day, wearing the expression of a man who had come to correct everyone else's understanding. Clementina received him in the smaller drawing room with the Dowager Duchess present and Louis standing near the mantel, and far enough from Clementina that no one could mistake his presence for ownership of the conversation. Leopold bowed first to the Dowager, then to Louis, and only afterward to his cousin. "Clementina, I hear you have been making inquiries in Zeus." "I have." "With his grace." "With my solicitor, the Dowager Duchess's companion, and his grace." Leopold's mouth tightened at the correction. "You might have spoken to me before involving a dealer in a family matter." "I did speak to you more than once. You asked where old furnishings had gone while everyone at Elmhurst Hall was trying to settle Aunt Miriam's affairs. I asked where property named in her will had gone." Leopold exhaled through his nose. "There, that is precisely what I mean. You make every household decision sound like litigation." Louis said nothing. Clementina noticed that. A week earlier, he would probably have answered insult with authority. Now, he let her decide whether the insult deserved attention. "Mr. Crowther's stockbook records you as consignor of Aunt Miriam's walnut long case on the 18th of August. Clementina said. Leopold did not look surprised. "Of course it does. Then you do not deny arranging the sale." "Why would I? I was trying to stabilize the household accounts after a death. Elmhurst Hall cannot be run on sentiment." The phrase from Crowther returned to her almost exactly. Stabilize the household accounts. "Was the clock yours to sell?" she asked. Leopold's face cooled. "It stood at Elmhurst Hall." "That was not my question. A clock of that size is hardly a keepsake carried in a reticule, nor does its size transfer ownership. You always did enjoy distinctions. No one else considered useful." Clementina felt the old pressure behind the words, the familiar suggestion that precision itself was a character defect. She kept her voice even. "My usefulness is not under discussion." The Dowager Duchess shifted one hand over the head of her cane. Leopold glanced toward her and moderated his tone. "I am not accusing Clementina of anything, Your Grace. I am saying that after Aunt Miriam's death, there were bills, servants, repairs, and accounts that required settlement. Some property was disposed of. I acted as the man responsible for the house." "Were you legally responsible for Miriam's personal property?" Louis asked. It was his first question. Leopold turned to him. "I was responsible for Elmhurst Hall." "That was not what I asked." Clementina looked at Louis. He did not press further. He had made the distinction and stopped. Leopold's irritation sharpened. If Clementina insists on dragging this through county drawing rooms, then perhaps she should be prepared for people to examine her own part in these clocks. Clementina became still. "My part? You will see tomorrow." "Tomorrow?" the Dowager Duchess asked. Leopold gave her a polished bow. "I understand Your Grace's antiquarian breakfast viewing remains scheduled." "It does." "Then I think some facts should be available before gossip outruns them." Clementina studied him. He had come prepared. More than prepared, he had come confident. "If you have evidence, bring it." Leopold looked directly at her. "I intend to." He left before dinner, choosing rooms at a nearby posting inn rather than accept Stoneleigh hospitality, and Clementina spent the evening refusing to guess what he meant. On the 7th morning, that refusal became harder. The East Clock Gallery filled slowly after breakfast with the invited county guests, collectors, and neighbors who had been expected before Clementina's dispute ever began. The walnut long case stood untouched against the panelled wall. Clementina wore her steel-rimmed spectacles and kept her hands loosely clasped before her. Lewis moved among his guests as host, but did not remain stationed beside her. That, too, was deliberate. He had learned that protection could become another form of display if badly handled. Lady Victoria Lovell approached first. "You look remarkably composed, Miss Elmhurst. I have had breakfast. That is not usually enough for composure." Victoria's smile was mild. "I hope this affair can soon be returned to where it belongs." "And where is that?" "Within the family. People of standing survive embarrassment by containing it. Public quarrels rarely improve anyone." Clementina understood then that Victoria's objections were not only personal. She believed order depended upon silence being enforced by the people most capable of surviving the truth. An accusation made publicly cannot always be corrected privately, Clementina said. Sometimes public correction creates more damage than the original mistake. Only if appearance matters more than accuracy. Victoria's eyes flicked toward Clementina's spectacles. "You do have a gift for making accuracy sound like a social virtue." "Occasionally it is." Before Victoria could answer, Sir Leopold entered carrying a narrow leather portfolio. Conversation diminished without anyone formally requesting silence. Several guests who had heard about the clock turned toward him. Leopold greeted the Dowager and Lewis, then positioned himself near the walnut long case. "Since there has been considerable discussion concerning my late aunt's clocks," he said, "I thought it best to bring something Miss Elmhurst may have forgotten to mention." Clementina's heartbeat changed. He opened the portfolio and removed a folded sheet. She recognized the handwriting before he finished unfolding it. Hers. The 1857 valuation memorandum. For one instant, pain arrived before thought. Not because the document was false, because it was true. Her neat columns, her descriptions, her figures, her careful notes concerning condition and repairs. The same exactness that had always been mocked as excessive now sat in Leopold's hands, with a room full of people watching. "Miss Elmhurst prepared this herself," Leopold said. "She identified the 3 clocks, described their commercial condition, and assigned values. I relied upon household records such as this when disposing of effects after Aunt Miriam's death." Lady Victoria looked at Clementina with carefully moderated concern. Then Miss Elmhurst knew precisely what the Duke's clock was worth before she was found examining it before dawn. A gentleman near the window lowered his gaze. An older lady looked from Clementina to the paper, then away. No one gasped. The restraint was worse. Clementina felt the humiliation settle through the room as a possibility reasonable people might entertain. Leopold held the sheet higher. "Is this your handwriting?" Clementina could have delayed. She could have asked to inspect the paper first. She did neither. "Yes." The silence deepened. Leopold's expression eased by a fraction. "Then we are agreed. We are agreed that I wrote it, and valued the clocks. For insurance, that is your description now." Clementina stepped closer, but she did not reach for the memorandum. "Does the paper say sale?" Leopold's mouth tightened. "It lists values. Does it authorize you to dispose of anything? You are reducing estate management to a vocabulary exercise." "Authority is often found in vocabulary." Someone near the back shifted. Clementina continued. "Does that memorandum name you as agent?" Leopold said nothing. "Does it authorize disposal after Aunt Miriam's death?" "You knew the clocks had commercial value." "Yes." "You helped establish that value." "Yes." and now you object because one was sold. I object because valuation is not ownership and knowledge is not consent." Lady Victoria gave a soft sigh. "Surely no one is accusing you of dishonesty, Miss Elmhurst, but a woman may be entirely honest and still have ambitions she prefers not to state." Clementina looked at her. "Then state yours plainly." Victoria's colour changed slightly. "I beg your pardon. If you believe I manufactured this dispute to place myself near His Grace, say so. If you do not, then stop arranging the suggestion around me and calling it delicacy." The room became utterly still. Victoria's smile disappeared. Leopold seized the opening. No one needs to speculate about motives if Clementina can prove the clock was Aunt Miriam's in the first place. That was the real challenge. Clementina felt it land. The memorandum proved she knew the clocks. Crowther proved Leopold had consigned a walnut long case after Miriam's death. Neither fact alone proved that the physical clock at Stoneleigh was Miriam's. She looked at Lewis for the first time. He had not interrupted once. His face was composed, but his attention was entirely on her. Then he looked at Leopold. "The handwriting is established," he said. "The valuation is established. Nothing shown here establishes Miss Elmhurst's authority to sell, nor yours." Leopold drew himself up. "Your Grace, surely you see why suspicion is justified." "Suspicion may exist." Lewis's voice remained level. "In my house, it will not be called proof." He did not say he believed Clementina because he cared for her. He did not mention the proposal she had refused. He did not silence Leopold with rank. He simply held the line between fact and implication. Something in Clementina steadied. She turned toward the long case. Behind its lower door lay two butterfly-shaped brass plates she had recognized before anyone in this room knew why they mattered. Memory alone was not enough. The person who had made those repairs might be. Clementina looked back at Leopold. "You are right about one thing." His brows lifted. "Am I? I should prove that clock was Aunt Miriam's." She turned to Lewis. "I need to find the craftsman who repaired the split in the lower case." Lewis did not offer to take over. "Then that is where we look next." Clementina did not allow the humiliation of the antiquarian breakfast to become an excuse for waiting. By the following morning, the 8th day since her arrival at Stoneleigh, she had already decided that Elias Venn, the cabinet maker whose name appeared in an old household repair account kept among Miriam's surviving papers, would not be summoned to the Duke's house like a tradesman expected to confirm a nobleman's preferred conclusion. She would go to him. Lewis learned this in the morning room after breakfast, where the Dowager Duchess was opening correspondence and pretending not to listen. "I can have Venn brought here by noon tomorrow," Lewis said. Clementina closed the small notebook in which she had copied the cabinet maker's direction in Lewes. "I know. And you do not want that?" "No." Lewis leaned one shoulder against the mantel. "May I ask why, before deciding you are being difficult for sport?" "You may. Progress already." Clementina ignored that. "If Mr. Venn comes to Stoneleigh, he arrives knowing a duke wishes him to inspect a disputed clock in a duke's collection. However honorable his intentions, the room itself will influence him." Lewis's expression sharpened. "You think he might tell me what he thinks I want to hear. I think most people become aware of rank when it is standing 6 feet away." The Dowager Duchess turned a page. "Some of us become aware of it when it is speaking too much." Lewis glanced toward his grandmother, then back to Clementina. "You want to hear Venn in his own workshop, with his own records, before anyone has prepared him beyond knowing that I wish to ask about an old repair." And you want to lead the questions? Yes, he considered that for a moment. What would you like me to do? The question was so simple that Clementina almost missed what had changed. On her first morning at Stoneleigh, he had decided what she was before learning her name. Now he was asking what role she permitted him to take. She answered with equal care, "Come if you wish. Speak if Mr. Venn addresses you directly. Otherwise, let me ask." Agreed. No message to Sir Leopold. Obviously. Nothing is obvious merely because we both prefer it. Lewis gave her a look of wounded dignity. You are becoming intolerably fond of correcting me. I had no idea you were so delicate. The Dowager Duchess made a small sound that might have been laughter. Lewis's mouth curved, but he did not turn the exchange into flirtation. Mrs. Armitage again? He asked. Yes, and Mr. Harcourt, if he can come. I will have the carriage ready after luncheon. They reached Lewes in the early afternoon. The journey was uneventful enough that Clementina spent most of it looking through the window rather than rehearsing questions she already knew. Elias Venn's workshop stood behind a narrow frontage, on a busier street than Crowther's, its yard crowded with timber lengths, stripped chair frames, cabinet doors, and one dismantled clock case resting on trestles. The smell of glue, old wood, and fresh shavings met them before the apprentice who opened the gate had finished asking their names. Venn himself emerged from a rear workroom, wiping his hands on a cloth. He was an elderly man with a stooped back, broad hands, and a pair of magnifying lenses perched on his forehead. His eyes moved over the party, paused at Lewis, then settled on Clementina. You're Miss Elmhurst. Yes. The note said you wanted to ask about a walnut long case. I do. Venn gestured toward a workbench. Then ask. No bow to the Duke, beyond the minimum courtesy. No visible anxiety. Clementina liked him immediately. She did not begin by saying where the clock now stood. Years ago, she said, did you repair a walnut long case belonging to Miss Miriam Elmhurst? Venn frowned. Miriam Elmhurst. He repeated the name as though testing a joint. The lady at Elmhurst Hall who argued with me about repair plates. Clementina's pulse quickened. What did she argue? That ugly repairs were honest repairs, and there was no reason to hide them if they held. His mouth twitched. I told her customers preferred not to see where furniture had failed. Clementina felt something almost like grief and affection strike together. That sounds like Aunt Miriam. Venn studied her more carefully. You're her niece? Yes. Then what do you want to know? The lower case had an old split. Most long cases that survive long enough have something wrong with the lower case. This one was repaired with 2 brass plates shaped like butterflies. Venn's eyes narrowed. Anything unusual about them? One plate had a left wing filed narrower than the right. The other sat slightly lower, as though the alignment was corrected after the first screw. He stopped wiping his hands. Where did you see that? Clementina did not answer immediately. Do you remember making such repairs? I remember making many. Do you keep records? Venn looked toward a shelf built into the rear wall. Every day book since I opened this place. Then I would prefer the book to answer before memory does. Lewis said nothing. Clementina could feel his attention, but he kept precisely to the role she had given him. Venn's expression changed from suspicion to something close to approval. Good. He crossed the workshop and returned with a thick bound volume whose leather corners had softened with age. He set it on his own bench and began turning pages. Clementina remained across from him. She did not reach for the book. Elmhurst, he muttered. Miriam. His finger stopped. Here. Clementina moved closer. The entry was brief. Walnut long case, Miss Miriam Elmhurst. Lower panel split. 2 brass butterfly plates, hinges checked. The date was years before Miriam's death. Clementina read the line once, then again. Mr. Harcourt leaned nearer without touching the page. "Does the entry identify the exact plates?" he asked. Venn tapped one thick finger beside the line. "No drawing, if that's what you mean." Clementina appreciated the answer. "Then the daybook proves you repaired a walnut long case for Aunt Miriam. But not yet that the clock at Stoneleigh is the same one." Venn looked at her sharply. "Stoneleigh?" His gaze shifted to Lewis. "The Duke's clock?" Lewis finally spoke. "A clock currently in my custody." Venn looked between them. "And you think it's hers?" Clementina answered. "I think the repairs may be yours. If they are, I'll know." "From the filing?" Venn nodded. "No 2 of my butterfly plates were filed quite alike. I made them by hand. If the left wing is narrow because I took too much off and tried to balance it, I'll remember the mistake when I see it." "Would you come to Stoneleigh tomorrow?" Clementina asked. "To inspect the actual clock, with witnesses present?" Venn closed the daybook. "Yes, the original book remains here. Naturally, you bring no conclusion except what you personally observe." A faint smile appeared. "Miss Elmhurst, you don't need to teach me how to recognize my own bad filing." "No, only how not to improve it afterward." Venn laughed once. "I'll come." On the return to Stoneleigh, Lewis waited until they had left Lewes behind before speaking. "You were right." Clementina looked across the carriage. "About? Going to him instead of bringing him to me. That admission cost you almost nothing. Do not ruin it." Mrs. Armitage hid a smile. Lewis continued. In his workshop, he was not trying to impress anyone. "Especially me. That was the point. And you did not ask whether he believed the clock was Miriam's, because he has not seen it. You really dislike convenient conclusions. Only when they arrive before evidence." Lewis met her gaze. "I am beginning to like that about you." The words were quiet enough that Mrs. Armitage might not have heard. Clementina did. She felt the warmth of them and chose not to answer with wit. She simply looked back for 1 second longer than necessary, then turned toward the window. No touch followed. None was needed. At Stoneleigh the next morning, while preparations were made for Venn's visit, the Dowager Duchess asked Clementina to join her privately in the blue sitting room. "Victoria called yesterday evening," she said without preamble. Clementina removed one glove finger by finger. "Did she?" She asked whether Crowther's stockbook truly dated the consignment after Miriam's death. "What did you tell her?" "That it did, and that Sir Leopold is named as consignor." Clementina became still. "Then she knows his account is incomplete." At minimum, the Dowager's expression hardened. "I suggested she reconsider certain insinuations, and," she said, "a woman can be innocent of theft and still ambitious, and that families of standing do not survive by permitting every embarrassment to become public theatre." Clementina felt the insult, but beneath it, she recognized something clearer. Now, Victoria was not merely defending Leopold. She was defending a system in which the powerful decided which truths deserved daylight. "She thinks silence is a form of order," Clementina said. "Yes, and that my refusal to be silent is ambition." "Yes." Clementina put her glove back on. "Then I will not ask her to retract anything today." The Dowager studied her. "Why not?" "Because she would only change the wording and keep the belief." Clementina stood. "Tomorrow, Mr. Venn will inspect the clock. If the repairs are his, then I will have something stronger than Victoria's opinion and stronger than my own memory." At the door, she paused. "I am finished asking people to think well of me before they have decided whether truth interests them. She crossed the East Clock Gallery without opening the long case. Lewis was there speaking with Mr. Bell about the following day's arrangements. He looked at her. Everything ready? Almost. What is missing? Clementina glanced toward the walnut clock. An answer from the man who made the mistake in the brass. Lewis followed her gaze. Behind the closed lower door, 2 butterfly-shaped plates waited exactly where they had been for years. By tomorrow, either they would become the strongest link in her case, or one more resemblance she had mistaken for certainty. Elias Venn arrived at Stoneleigh shortly after 10 on the 10th day, carrying a worn leather tool roll and nothing else. He had left his repair daybook in Lou's exactly where it belonged, in the workshop where Clementina had first seen the entry naming Miss Miriam Elmhurst and the walnut long case. That mattered to her. No evidence had been collected for effect. No document had been carried from one house to another simply because the Duke wished it. The East Clock Gallery was quiet when Venn entered. Mrs. Hale stood near the long windows. Mr. Bell, the Winterbourne estate agent, waited beside a narrow table with writing materials. Lewis remained several feet from the long case, leaving the center of the room to Clementina and the craftsman. Clementina wore her steel-rimmed spectacles and held no notebook in her hands. She wanted to see Venn's face before she recorded his conclusion. "You have not opened it since I saw you," he asked. "Only for the earlier inspection," Clementina said. "Nothing has been altered since then." Mrs. Hale nodded. "No cleaning, repair, or polishing, Mr. Venn." He grunted approvingly. "Good." Clementina gestured toward the clock. "Please examine it in whatever order you normally would." "I would rather not direct your attention to the plates first." Venn looked at her. "You want to know whether I find them without being led?" "Yes." Lewis said nothing. Venn moved around the long case slowly. He looked at the walnut grain, the lower molding, the hinges, and the old split that showed faintly beneath the case. He crouched, lifted his magnifying lenses from his forehead to his eyes, and inspected the joinery. Clementina could hear only the clock's steady ticking and the faint scrape of Venn's sleeve against his coat. At last he stood and looked toward Mrs. Hale. "May I open the lower door?" "You may." She unlocked it and stepped aside. Venn swung the door outward. The 2 butterfly-shaped brass repair plates caught the grey morning light. He stopped. Clementina's breath caught, though she had promised herself it would not. Venn leaned closer. He did not speak immediately. His right forefinger hovered near the left plate without touching it. "There," he said at last. "That is mine." Lewis shifted slightly, but Clementina did not turn. "Which part?" she asked. Venn pointed to the left wing. "I took too much off this edge. You can see how the wing narrows sooner than the other side. I tried to balance the shape afterward, but I never quite did." He moved to the second plate. "And here." Near the lower screw were 2 small marks in the brass. The file slipped twice. "I remember because I was annoyed with myself both times." Clementina stepped closer. "You are certain?" Venn straightened and looked directly at her. "Yes. Certain that you made these plates?" "Yes." "And that the clock on which you fitted them belonged to Miss Miriam Elmhurst?" "Yes." "From memory alone?" His mouth twitched. "No. From the repair I recognize and the daybook entry you saw yesterday." The book gives Miss Miriam Elmhurst, walnut long case, lower panel split, 2 brass butterfly plates. The date is years before she died. Clementina let out a breath she had not realized she was holding. Then the physical clock at Stoneleigh can now be connected to Aunt Miriam's possession before her death. "That is what I am saying." Mr. Bell stepped forward. Would you be willing to put that identification in writing? Venn glanced at Clementina before answering. I will state what I know, no more. That is all I would ask, she said. The original daybook remains in your workshop. Naturally, and you need not bring it here. I was not planning to. Lewis's mouth almost moved. Clementina noticed and nearly smiled herself. Venn closed the lower door carefully. If this matter goes further, anyone who wishes to see the book can come to Luz or see it there when the clock is brought for proper comparison. That is sensible, Clementina said. Good. I enjoy being told so by someone who means it. Before Mr. Bell could begin drafting the brief statement, Mr. Pritchard appeared at the gallery entrance with a folded note on a silver salver. Miss Elmhurst. This was delivered from Luz. Clementina recognized Nathaniel Crowther's hand and broke the seal herself. The note was concise. Crowther's solicitor had advised him that he could make a formal statement concerning the August consignment and could produce his original stock book when required, provided it remained in his custody except for direct personal production. He would confirm that Sir Leopold Elmhurst had been the consignor after Miriam's death, and that Clementina had not been named as seller, agent, or authorizing party. Clementina read the note twice, then handed it to Lewis. He read it silently and passed it to Mr. Bell. That gives us an independent commercial link and an independent repair link, Mr. Bell said. Clementina nodded. Yes. And Sir Leopold's own memorandum still proves only that you knew the clock's values, Lewis added. Yes. She looked toward the closed, long-case door. The facts had begun to join each other without requiring her memory to carry the entire weight. Crowther's stockbook placed Leopold in the sale. Venn's work connected the physical clock to Miriam. The valuation memorandum still belonged to Clementina's hand. But its meaning was no longer whatever Leopold wished a room full of people to imagine. She should have felt victorious. Instead, relief reached somewhere less orderly. Her vision blurred. Clementina lifted one hand toward her spectacles, thinking they had slipped. They had not. She removed them anyway. Mrs. Hale quietly gathered Mr. Bell's draft and followed Venn toward the door, so that his statement could be completed in the adjoining room. Within moments, Clementina and Lewis were alone in the gallery, though the open doorway and nearby servants kept the situation proper. Lewis did not approach. Would you like me to leave? He asked. Clementina looked down at the spectacles in her hand. No. Would you like me to say something? No. That I can manage. A small, unsteady laugh escaped her. She pressed her lips together. I thought I would feel better than this. You do not have to feel anything in the correct order. Clementina looked up. Do you know what frightened me most when Leopold showed that memorandum? Lewis waited. For half a second, I believed the implication. His expression changed. That you had authorized the sale? Not exactly. That perhaps I had built the entire claim out of grief and stubbornness. That perhaps I remembered the repairs because I needed them to be the same. That perhaps everyone who called me too exact had been right in the opposite direction, and I had begun mistaking certainty for truth. Lewis took no step toward her, but you checked. Yes, you let Crowther contradict you if he needed to. You let Venn contradict you if he needed to. Yes, then your doubt did not make you weak. Clementina swallowed. It almost made me stop trusting my own eyes. Lewis's voice softened. You were right to doubt yourself enough to test what you saw. You would have been wrong only if you had doubted yourself enough to stop looking. The sentence settled into her with painful precision. For years she had been told that seeing too much made her difficult. Now the evidence had finally come from outside her own memory, and the relief of it was almost unbearable. Lewis looked at her for a long moment. "May I hold you?" He did not move first. He did not reach because she was upset. He waited. Clementina set her spectacles carefully on the nearby table. Then she crossed the distance between them herself. "Yes." Lewis opened his arms only after she stepped forward. Clementina rested against him and felt his hands settle lightly at her back. Nothing in the embrace demanded an answer she had not given. It was steady, warm, and restrained. For several seconds, she allowed herself to stop being the woman who knew which document had to remain in which room and which fact was not yet proven. She simply breathed. Then her own arms closed more firmly around him. She embraced him back fully. His breath changed almost imperceptibly, but he did not tighten his hold beyond what she had chosen. When Clementina finally drew away, Lewis released her at once. No kiss followed. No joke hurried in to protect either of them from what had happened. She picked up her spectacles and put them on again. The gallery sharpened around her. "Better?" Lewis asked. "Clearer, Mr." Bell returned at that moment, carrying the Winterbourne purchase account under one arm. His expression had lost its usual composure. "Your Grace, Miss Elmhurst, while reviewing the August entry, I found a margin note I had not thought significant at the time." Lewis took the book. Clementina moved beside him. Beneath the purchase price, in Mr. Bell's own hand, were 4 words. "Vendor requires immediate settlement." Lewis read the figure above them, then looked at Clementina. The amount Stoneleigh had paid was substantially below the value she had recorded in 1857. "It appears," he said quietly, "that my house benefited from Sir Leopold's urgency." The following morning, the Winterbourne purchase account lay open in the estate office, beneath a rectangle of clear October light, and Lewis had not tried to make the figures kinder overnight. Clementina stood beside the broad desk with Mr. Bell opposite her, and the steel-rimmed spectacles firmly in place. The long case remained untouched in the East Clock Gallery. The account had returned to its proper custody after the previous day's discovery, and Mr. Bell had spent the evening checking the purchase against his August correspondence with Nathaniel Crowther. Nothing changed the essential fact. Stoneleigh had paid substantially less for the walnut long case than Clementina had valued it in 1857, approximately 25% below your memorandum, Mr. Bell said. He looked deeply uncomfortable. "Though I must emphasize, Miss Elmhurst, that I believed the transaction entirely regular, Mr. Crowther represented the clock as a legitimate consignment. Sir Leopold's urgency appeared commercial, not improper." "I do not doubt your good faith," Clementina said. "Did you ask why the vendor required immediate settlement?" "No. The dealer stood between us. My concern was whether the object suited Stoneleigh and whether the price was fair." Lewis looked down at the margin note, which it was. "More than fair." Mr. Bell inclined his head. "Yes, Your Grace." The words did not accuse House Winterbourne of fraud. They did something less dramatic and, to Lewis, apparently more unpleasant. They showed that his estate had benefited from a transaction whose legitimacy was now in serious doubt. Clementina watched him, read the entry again. She did not tell him what to do. That mattered. On the first day, she had required truth even if it embarrassed his house. If he needed her to remind him now, the promise had meant less than she hoped. "Crowther's book already places Sir Leopold as consignor," Lewis said. "Venn can identify the clock from the repairs. Miriam's will and property schedule address ownership. Mr. Bell nodded. Yes, Your Grace. So this account is not necessary to prove that Miss Elmhurst did not authorize the sale. Strictly speaking, no. Lewis rested one hand on the desk, and if we omit the purchase price from any later inspection, Mr. Bell hesitated. The central provenance case would remain strong. Clementina kept her face still. Lewis turned his gaze toward her, perhaps expecting argument. She offered none. After a moment, he looked back at Mr. Bell. Then make a fair copy of the relevant entry for Mr. Harcourt, but the original remains in the estate office until it is required. When we produce it, the price and the margin note are both included. Mr. Bell's brows rose. The note as well, Your Grace? Especially the note. It may suggest that Stoneleigh profited from Sir Leopold's haste. Stoneleigh did profit from his haste, without knowing the circumstances. That explains our conduct. It does not alter the account. Lewis placed one finger beside the 4 words in the margin. If our advantage is part of the truth, it is part of the record. Something inside Clementina went unexpectedly quiet. This was not protection, as society usually described it. Lewis had not ridden to her rescue, silenced a room with his title, or offered his name like a shield. He had simply chosen not to hide the one piece of evidence that made his own house look less comfortable. Mr. Bell bowed. I understand, and Mr. Harcourt should have access to the original here before we take it anywhere. Of course. After the estate agent withdrew, Lewis closed the ledger but did not put it away. You were very silent. I was waiting. For what? To see whether you meant what you said on the first morning. He looked at her. That sounds ominous. It was not meant to be pleasant. And Clementina allowed the answer to settle before speaking. You meant it. His expression changed by almost nothing, but she saw the relief. Before either could say more, Mr. Pritchard appeared at the door. Your Grace, Lady Victoria Lovell, asks whether she may speak with you and Miss Elmhurst. Lewis turned to Clementina. Do you want her admitted? The question reached her with more force than it should have. He no longer treated her presence as something to manage around. Yes. Lady Victoria entered in a dark green walking dress, composed as ever. Her eyes went first to the closed ledger. I hope I am not interrupting anything private. Only an uncomfortable account, Lewis said. Then perhaps I have arrived at the right moment. She looked at Clementina. I understand, Mr. Venn has identified the repairs. He has, and Mr. Crowther is now prepared to state that Sir Leopold consigned the clock after Miss Miriam Elmhurst's death. His solicitor has advised that he may do so. Victoria exhaled as if this confirmed what she had come to prevent. Then surely the matter can now be settled without further spectacle. Clementina said nothing. Lewis asked, settled how? Sir Leopold accounts for whatever proceeds can be traced. Miss Elmhurst's ownership is acknowledged. The clock is returned if necessary. There is no reason to gather half the county around a workbench merely to demonstrate that a family handled an inheritance badly. A family? Clementina asked. Victoria's eyes hardened slightly. You know what I mean. I would rather hear it accurately. Very well. Elmhurst handled it badly. Stoneleigh bought in good faith. You recover what is yours. Everyone avoids needless humiliation. Lewis said, needless to whom? Victoria turned to him. Your Grace, surely you understand the obligation of rank. Families like yours do not preserve confidence by displaying every mistake they survive. There are matters one contains privately precisely because public scandal harms people who had no part in creating it. Such as House Winterbourne, Clementina said, among others. And me, Victoria paused. You would be vindicated where it matters. Where does it matter? Among people whose opinions have consequence. Clementina felt the old social machinery behind the sentence. Truth counted. Victoria believed only after rank decided where it could safely be acknowledged. The insinuation that I invented this claim was made in front of witnesses, Clementina said. My handwriting was displayed in front of witnesses. My motives were questioned in front of witnesses. I will not accept a private correction offered after a public suspicion. Victoria's mouth tightened. You are asking His Grace to expose the fact that his estate purchased disputed property at an unusually favorable price. I am asking nothing of him that he has not already chosen. Victoria looked sharply at Lewis. You intend to produce the account? Yes. Including the price? Yes. Why? Because it happened. Her disbelief was almost more revealing than anger would have been. You would let Miss Elmhurst's insistence on public correction damage your own house. Lewis looked at Clementina instead of answering Victoria. Is public correction still what you want? There was no pressure in his tone, and no promise to spare her from consequences she had already considered. The decision rested exactly where it belonged. Yes, Lewis nodded. Then that is what we do. Victoria stared at him. You are allowing this. Lewis's expression cooled. I am not allowing Miss Elmhurst anything. She is deciding what correction she requires for an accusation made against her. I am deciding whether my own records will be honest. For the first time, Victoria had no polished answer ready. You will both regret making this larger than it needs to be. Clementina met her gaze. It became large when people found the accusation more interesting than the facts. Victoria turned and left without another word. The office remained quiet after the door closed. Lewis looked down at the account again. She may be right about one thing. Which? My house will look foolish. Clementina almost smiled. Does that trouble you? Profoundly. You conceal it well. Years of training. He glanced at her. I am supposed to look composed while discovering expensive mistakes. A useful ducal skill, almost entirely useless. Then his humor faded. For perhaps half a second yesterday, I wanted Belle to tell me that note did not matter. Clementina watched him. And today I know that if I conceal the inconvenient part, every correct thing I say afterward becomes less trustworthy. The answer moved through her before she had time to examine it. She stepped closer. Lewis remained still. Clementina lifted one gloved hand and touched his cheek. Surprise crossed his face, clean and unguarded. She had never touched him this way. There was no need for balance, comfort, or evidence. She simply wanted him to understand what his choice had meant. You could have hidden that account, she said. Lewis held her gaze. Then I would have deserved to lose your trust. Slowly, giving her every opportunity to withdraw, he raised his hand and covered hers lightly where it rested against his cheek. Clementina did not move away. The contact lasted only a quiet moment before footsteps approached in the corridor. She lowered her hand first, and Lewis released it immediately. Mr. Harcourt entered, carrying a folded note. Miss Elmhurst, Your Grace. Mr. Venn has agreed to receive the interested parties and witnesses at his workshop the day after tomorrow. Mr. Crowther will attend and bring his stockbook personally. Clementina looked at Lewis. The truth was no longer confined to Stoneley's rooms. In 2 days, every clue they had gathered would stand beside the clock itself. The afternoon before the Lewes inspection, Stoneley seemed unnaturally quiet. The long case still stood in the East Clock Gallery, untouched except for the careful examinations already witnessed. Mr. Bell had arranged for experienced servants to prepare it for transport before sunset. But nothing would be crated until Clementina had seen the condition recorded one final time. She had spent the morning with Mr. Harcourt, reviewing the sequence of evidence and the people who would attend Elias Venn's workshop the following day. By 3 o'clock, every practical question had been answered. That was when Lewis sent word asking whether she would speak with him in the morning room. Clementina found him standing near the tall south window with no ledger in his hands and no note waiting on the table. The door remained partly open. In the adjoining drawing room, the Dowager Duchess could be heard, directing a secretary through correspondence. With enough firmness to make propriety unquestionable, Clementina entered and removed her gloves. "You wished to see me." "I did." Lewis looked more serious than he had in the estate office the day before, "and I promised myself I would not begin by telling you how tomorrow ought to proceed." "That is encouraging. It has required discipline." Clementina set her gloves beside a porcelain bowl. "Then I should reward the effort by listening." Lewis gave the faintest smile, but it vanished quickly. "There is something I should have said before tomorrow." Clementina waited. He had grown better at silence over the past 12 days. So had she. Neither rushed to rescue the other from it. "The first morning you came here," he said, "I saw a situation I did not understand and treated my authority as though it made understanding unnecessary." Clementina held his gaze. "Yes, I have apologized for the command." "You have, and publicly corrected it." "You have, but the more I have watched you work, the more I understand that the worst part was not the sentence itself." She did not help him, Lewis continued. "I believed deciding quickly was the same thing as leading well." His jaw tightened slightly. "I have spent most of my life being told that uncertainty looks weak in a man with my title. My father believed hesitation invited challenge, so I learned to speak before doubt became visible." Clementina remembered the man in the gallery, certain before he knew her name. "And now I think pretending certainty where there is none is a more expensive weakness." He exhaled slowly. "Being wrong still frightens me." The admission was quiet, not because I think I should never be wrong, because I was taught that everyone is watching. For the moment, a duke does not know what to do. Clementina took one step nearer, not enough to close the distance entirely. "That sounds exhausting." "It is also remarkably effective at making a man intolerable." "You have improved." His mouth shifted, a devastating tribute. "Do not ruin it." "I will try." The brief humor passed. Lewis looked at her with an openness she had not seen in him before. The first proposal was part of the same flaw. Clementina felt her heartbeat change. "I know. I had harmed you. I saw a problem. Marriage was the largest action available to me, so I offered it, before asking whether it had anything to do with what you wanted. You were honest when I asked whether you loved me." "Yes, that mattered. It does not make the proposal wise." "No," he accepted that at once. Clementina appreciated the absence of self-defense more than any polished remorse. Lewis stepped away from the window. He stopped several feet from her. "I do not want to make the same mistake twice." Something in her chest tightened. "Then do not." "I will not." His voice lowered. "I love you, Clementina." The words came without title, without rank, without any reference to reputation. For one suspended moment, the room seemed to become more precise rather than less. Clementina could see the fine crease near his mouth, the slight tension in one hand, the way he had deliberately kept that hand at his side. Lewis continued before she could answer. I love the way you refuse to make a fact larger because it would be convenient. I love that you would rather be uncertain honestly than certain falsely. I love that you asked me to expose my own house if truth required it, and then waited to see whether I would choose to do so without being pushed. His eyes moved briefly to her spectacles and returned to her face. And I love that you no longer seem willing to make yourself smaller for people who find clear sight uncomfortable. Clementina felt emotion rise so quickly that for a moment she had no language ready for it. She did not remove her spectacles. She did not look away. And I love you, Louis. He became utterly still. Clementina went on because she wanted him to hear more than reciprocation. I love that you learned to stop before reaching. I love that when I say no, you no longer hear a problem to solve. I love that you showed me the Winterbourne account when hiding it would have protected you. Her voice softened. And I love that when you do not know, you have begun to say so. Louis drew a breath that sounded almost unsteady. That may be the first time uncertainty has ever recommended me to a woman. Do not become vain about it. I shall attempt humility. Poorly, almost certainly. Clementina smiled. The warmth between them changed. It did not become hurried. It became clear. Louis did not step forward. He looked at her for one long moment and asked, "May I kiss you?" Clementina had known, before entering the room, that something between them had changed after she touched his cheek the previous day. She had not known whether he would name it. Now the question itself mattered as much as what might follow. Yes? Louis still did not move. Clementina understood. The last distance remained hers. She crossed it. Her hand came to rest lightly against the front of his coat, and she lifted her face. Only then did Louis bend toward her. The kiss was gentle, restrained, and unmistakably mutual. His hand settled lightly at her upper arm, steadying rather than holding. Clementina remained close because she chose to. Nothing in the moment erased the insult in the gallery, the proposal she had refused, or the public suspicion waiting to be answered. The kiss did not repair those things. It belonged to what had grown after them. When they parted, Louis did not immediately move away, but neither did he reach for another kiss. I have spent 12 days learning not to improve a moment by doing more to it, he said quietly. Clementina laughed softly. Then the lessons are taking, painfully. She let her hand remain against his coat for another heartbeat, then lowered it. Louis's expression grew serious again. I will not ask you to marry me today. Clementina looked at him. Good. I had hoped for a more romantic response. You have already proposed once for the wrong reason. I am protecting your statistical record. His laugh was low and brief. Clementina reached for his hand. This time she initiated the contact without waiting for an offer. Louis closed his fingers around hers. Ask me after the truth no longer needs your name, she said. He searched her face. Then I will wait. Even though you dislike waiting, especially because I dislike it. They stood with their hands joined until footsteps approached in the corridor. Clementina withdrew first. Louis released her immediately. Mr. Bell appeared at the partly open door. Your Grace, Miss Elmhurst, the men are ready to prepare the long case for tomorrow. They went together to the East Clock Gallery. Mrs. Hale was already there with an inventory sheet. 2 experienced estate servants waited beside a padded wooden shipping crate. Clementina examined the clock before anything was touched. The walnut case remained unchanged. The lower door was opened once in Mrs. Hale's presence, so the butterfly-shaped plates and old split could be recorded. Then the movement was secured. the case protected with clean cloth and padding, and the entire long case carefully placed into the crate. No component was removed. No evidence changed hands. Mr. Bell noted each step. By sunset, the clock remained inside Stoneleigh, crated and ready for the estate wagon that would take it to Lewes in the morning. Clementina stood beside the sealed crate after everyone else had stepped back. Lewis remained several feet away. He did not tell her tomorrow would go well. He did not promise that rank would protect the outcome. He simply waited. Clementina looked at the crate, then at him. Tomorrow, the truth would have to stand without romance, without assumption, and without the shelter of his name. That was exactly why she could finally trust what had grown between them. The estate wagon left Stoneleigh shortly after 8 on the 13th morning, with the crated long case secured beneath padded straps, Mr. Bell riding beside the driver and one senior footman following on horseback. Clementina watched from the carriage behind as the wagon turned onto the road to Lewes. The clock had not left Stoneleigh since its purchase in August. Now every person who had questioned its history would see the same walnut case, the same old split, and the same brass repairs in the workshop of the man who had made them. The Dowager Duchess sat beside Clementina. Mr. Harcourt occupied the opposite seat, while Lewis sat beside him and said almost nothing. He had promised that the truth would not need his name. Clementina was grateful. He seemed determined to keep that promise, even when silence cost him. By the time they reached Elias Venn's workshop, the yard had already been cleared for the wagon. Venn supervised the unloading himself. He would not allow the case to be hurried through the doorway, and Mr. Bell recorded the condition of the crate. Before the fastenings were removed, the long case was lifted upright against a cleared wall beneath the high workshop windows. Light fell directly across the walnut. Clementina felt her pulse steady rather than quicken. She had seen this clock under suspicion, insult, and doubt. Today it would simply be examined. Sir Leopold arrived carrying the same narrow leather portfolio he had brought to Stoneleigh. Lady Victoria Lovell followed in another carriage with 2 county ladies and a gentleman, who had attended the antiquarian breakfast. Nathaniel Crowther came on foot from his premises carrying his original stock-book beneath one arm. He kept it close to his body until Venn cleared a corner of the central bench for it. "The book remains with me," Crowther said. "Of course," Clementina replied. Venn's repair day book already lay on another bench, exactly where it belonged. Mr. Harcourt looked around the room. "We are here to examine the disputed clock and the records connected with it. Nothing said today replaces whatever legal steps may follow." He stopped there. No one took a judge's chair. No one sat behind a desk. They stood around wood, brass, and ink. Sir Leopold opened his portfolio first, since Clementina's claim began with her own knowledge of the clocks. He said, perhaps we should begin with her own record. He unfolded the 1857 valuation memorandum. Clementina recognized every line. "That is my handwriting." Leopold looked toward the witnesses. "And the values are yours?" "Yes." "Then, there is no dispute that you knew precisely what the clock was worth." "There has never been a dispute about that." Crowther cleared his throat. "Nor about why she asked those values." Leopold turned. Crowther met his gaze. "Miss Elmhurst consulted me in 1857 for insurance valuation. She did not instruct me to sell the clocks. Miss Miriam Elmhurst did not instruct me to sell them either." Leopold's expression hardened. "You are relying on a conversation 2 years old. I am relying on the purpose for which I was consulted." Clementina looked at the memorandum. Does the paper authorize a sale? Leopold did not answer. Then let it remain what it is. A genuine valuation. She turned toward Venn, Mr. Venn, will you open the lower case? Venn stepped to the long case. Mrs. Hale was not present in Lewes, so Mr. Bell and two of the county witnesses moved close enough to observe, while Venn unlatched the door. The wood swung outward. Morning light struck the two butterfly-shaped brass plates. The room changed. This was no longer an argument about what Clementina remembered. The repairs were there for everyone to see. Venn bent and pointed, without removing either plate. This left wing narrows too early because I filed it badly. I tried to balance the other side afterward. He shifted his finger, and these two small nicks near the lower screw came from my file slipping twice. One of the county ladies leaned closer. You remember that after so many years. I remember the mistake. The book remembers the customer. He crossed to his bench and opened the repair day book. Miss Miriam Elmhurst, walnut long case, lower panel split, two brass butterfly plates, hinges checked. He tapped the date, years before her death. Sir Leopold gave a dismissive breath. That establishes that Aunt Miriam owned a walnut clock once. Venn looked at him. It establishes that the clock in this room carries the repairs I recorded on hers. He closed the lower door gently. Clementina felt no urge to add anything. The brass had done its work. Crowther brought his stockbook forward next. He opened to the August page himself. 18th August, 1859. Walnut long case, 8-day movement, repaired case. He turned the book slightly so the witnesses could see without taking possession. Consigna, Sir Leopold Elmhurst. Clementina watched Leopold rather than the page. His face did not collapse. Men like him rarely surrendered in one dramatic motion. They tightened. And do you see my cousin named as seller? Clementina asked. Crowther looked down. No, as agent? No, as authorizing executrix? No, Leopold spoke before she could continue. I told Mr. Crowther I had authority to dispose of effects from Elmhurst Hall. You did, Crowther said. You did not tell me Miss Miriam's will had separately disposed of this clock collection. Mr. Harcourt opened a slim document case. He did not produce a surprise paper. He produced the will and personal property schedule already known to the parties. Miss Miriam Elmhurst's clock collection was treated as her separate personal chattels. It was specifically left to Miss Clementina Elmhurst, who was also appointed executrix. Leopold's voice sharpened. The clock stood at Elmhurst Hall. I was managing the household. There were accounts to stabilize. Clementina looked at him. You said that before, because it is true. Then answer one question. If you believed you had lawful authority to sell property specifically left to me, why did you not tell the executrix before consigning it? Leopold looked toward Lewis. Lewis did not help him. Clementina continued. Why did you not tell Crowther that the will had been proved? Because I did not regard a large clock as some personal trinket, but Aunt Miriam's schedule did. Schedules can be drafted badly, and yet you used my valuation memorandum when it suited you. The silence that followed was cleaner than any confession. Leopold had an explanation for urgency. He had none for secrecy from the woman legally responsible for the estate. Mr. Bell stepped forward with the Winterbourne purchase account. Lewis's expression changed only slightly. This was the moment his own house entered the uncomfortable part of the truth. Bell opened the page. Stoneleigh purchased the clock from Mr. Crowther on August 26th. He read the price. Several people looked toward Clementina, remembering the higher valuation in her memorandum. Then Bell read the margin note in his own hand. Forden requires immediate settlement. Lady Victoria looked at Lewis. Surely, an advantageous purchase by your estate proves nothing against Sir Leopold. It does not prove the unauthorized sale, Lewis said. It proves that my house benefited from his urgency. In good faith, yes. Then why make more of it? I am making exactly as much of it as the record allows. Victoria's frustration surfaced. This is precisely why families of standing do not conduct every mistake before an audience. The clock can be returned. Sir Leopold can account privately. Must everyone be humiliated for an error? The Dowager Duchess turned toward her. You were told days ago that Crowther's book placed Leopold as consignor after Miriam's death. Victoria stiffened. I was told there were questions. You were told enough to know your suggestion that Clementina might be manufacturing this dispute for ambition had become indefensible. Victoria's face colored. I never accused her directly. Clementina looked at her. No, you made sure implication did the work. One of the county ladies lowered her eyes. Victoria drew herself up. Then I withdraw any suggestion that Miss Elmhurst invented the provenance dispute to improve her social position. Clementina inclined her head. Thank you. She did not ask for humiliation beyond correction. That mattered too. Leopold closed the portfolio around the valuation memorandum. If this theatrical display is finished, I assume the solicitors may handle whatever remains. They will, Mr. Harcourt said. You will be required to account for the proceeds of the clock and any other personal chattels disposed of without the executrix's authority. Crowther added, and until that accounting is resolved, I will accept no further consignments from you. Leopold looked at him with cold disbelief. Crowther did not look away. Lewis finally stepped forward, but only after Clementina had finished. He stood beside her rather than before her. There is one further fact I will not leave to rumor. Stoneleigh bought this clock innocently. My estate nevertheless benefited from a hurried sale, and on the morning Miss Elmhurst first examined it, I ordered her removed from my house, before I knew her name or her purpose. Several witnesses who had heard the original story went very still. I was wrong, Lewis said. Later I proposed marriage because I thought my name could repair the damage my judgment had caused. Miss Elmhurst refused me. She was right to refuse. His gaze moved to Clementina, but his next words were for the room. Marriage would not have made her truthful. She was truthful before I knew enough to recognize it. No one applauded. Clementina was grateful. The moment did not need approval. It needed memory. The remainder moved quickly. Mr. Harcourt arranged the first steps towards civil recovery. Crowther took possession of his stock book again. Venn closed his day book and returned it to its shelf. Sir Leopold left without approaching Clementina. His consequences would not arrive as a melodramatic punishment before luncheon. They would come through accounts, creditors, dealers, who no longer trusted his authority, and county men who had now seen him fail to explain a private post-death sale. Lady Victoria departed with the Dowager Duchess's confidence visibly gone. Venn rested one hand on the long case. And where does this go now? Every eye turned toward Clementina. Back to Stoneleigh for the present, she said. To the East Clock Gallery, exactly where it stood. Stoneleigh may hold it as Bailey until the paperwork is complete. Lewis inclined his head. As you wish. Mr. Bell recorded the decision. That afternoon, under his supervision, the same long case was secured again, and returned by estate wagon from Lewes to the East Clock Gallery at Stoneleigh. Nothing was removed. Nothing was damaged. Nothing changed ownership, merely because it crossed a road. Outside the workshop, before the carriage doors were closed, Louis offered Clementina his hand over a patch of uneven stones. He did not take hers until she placed it in his. Once she was steady, he released her. "May I call on you tomorrow?" he asked. Clementina looked at him through the spectacles she no longer removed for anyone's comfort. At a respectable hour, 6 weeks after the inspection in Luz, Clementina had stopped measuring her days by what Sir Leopold might do next. She had returned to her own lodgings, rather than remain at Stoneleigh under the convenient fiction that a woman involved with a duke must eventually become part of his household. Louis had accepted the decision without argument. He called at proper hours. He waited when she was unavailable. He did not send jewels, flowers by the cartload, or any gift large enough to become an obligation. Sometimes he brought a book about clockmaking because he thought she would find one diagram interesting. Sometimes he came with nothing at all. Mr. Harcourt continued the civil accounting against Sir Leopold. The proceeds from the walnut long case were traced. Questions concerning other chattels followed. Creditors, who had once accepted Leopold's appearance of stability, began asking how much of that appearance had depended upon property he had no right to sell. Nathaniel Crowther refused further consignments from him until the matter was resolved. Invitations to Elmhurst Hall became less frequent. No magistrate arrived dramatically at the door. No confession repaired everything. Leopold simply discovered that credibility, once examined, was more fragile than status had taught him to believe. Lady Victoria's family withdrew from the immediate circle around Stoneleigh after the Dowager Duchess made it unmistakably clear that no understanding with Norchester had ever existed. Victoria sent Clementina a formally correct note, withdrawing any implication that the clock dispute had been invented for social advancement. Clementina accepted the retraction and did not pretend it had become friendship. Through all of it, the walnut long case remained in the East Clock Gallery at Stoneleigh, exactly where Clementina had ordered it. Returned after Luz, House Winterbourne held it only as Bay Lee, while the final ownership papers were completed. No one moved it to a more flattering room. No one refinished the old split. The butterfly-shaped brass plates remained inside the lower door. Louis did not even authorize interior cleaning without asking whether Clementina objected. She did not object. She did, however, laugh at him. "You are asking permission to remove dust. I have learned that apparently harmless decisions can become expensive. This one costs a cloth. My education has made me cautious. Your education has made you theatrical. I am a duke. Some defects are hereditary. Their courtship developed in such ordinary moments. Dinners at Stoneleigh under the Dowager's watch. Daytime visits, a carriage drive when the roads were clear. Arguments about whether a poorly restored clock was more offensive than a badly painted portrait. Silence that no longer needed to be filled. Louis never asked again whether Clementina loved him. He knew. Clementina never asked whether he meant what he had said in the morning room. She knew that too. What remained unsettled was not affection. It was choice. Near the beginning of December, the Dowager Duchess invited Clementina to breakfast at Stoneleigh. The morning was cold, but bright enough that winter sunlight reached across the breakfast room and turned the silver coffee service pale gold. Clementina arrived in a dark blue wool gown with her steel-rimmed spectacles firmly in place. The Dowager ate with unusual efficiency, declared that correspondence had become intolerable, and abandoned the room before Clementina had finished her first cup of coffee. Louis watched the door close. She has been planning that retreat for 2 days. Clementina lifted one brow. Then I admire her discipline. She told me that if I spoke too quickly, she would return and interrupt. A sensible precaution. Louis smiled, but the humor did not entirely conceal his nerves. He set down his cup. The first time I asked you to marry me, I thought I was repairing damage. Clementina became still, he continued. I thought my name could shield you from something my judgment had made worse. I had known you for hours, understood almost nothing about your life, and still believed action was preferable to uncertainty. You have apologized for that. I know. I am not apologizing again. His gaze held hers. I am explaining why this question is different. Clementina did not rescue him from the silence. He had learned enough to survive it. Louis drew one slow breath. I love you. I respect the life you already own. I know you do not need Stoneleigh to make you respectable, or me to make you safe, or marriage to make anyone believe what you have already proved. His voice softened. I would like to share that life if you choose to share it with me. Will you marry me? Nothing in the room changed except Clementina's heartbeat. There was no scandal waiting outside the door, no witness whose opinion required management, no bargain hidden inside the question. She looked at the man who had once decided what she was before asking her name, and at the man who now waited without reaching for an answer. Yes. Louis closed his eyes for the briefest moment. When he opened them, the happiness in his face was so unguarded that Clementina smiled. You may look pleased, Your Grace. May I? On this occasion. He came around the table, but stopped beside her chair. May I take your hand? You are becoming almost unbearably conscientious. That is not a refusal. Clementina placed her hand in his. No, it is not. He lifted her fingers and kissed them gently through her glove. Several weeks passed before the wedding. Mr. Harcourt and the Winterbourne solicitors prepared a settlement preserving Clementina's annuity, Miriam's clock collection, and her separate personal property through trustees. Louis objected only when one clause seemed to give the trustees more practical discretion than Clementina herself. Clementina objected to his proposed correction because she thought it gave the trustees too little oversight. They argued until both solicitors looked exhausted and the clause emerged stronger. The bans were read on the required Sundays. The marriage took place lawfully and without unnecessary spectacle. The Dowager Duchess cried once and denied it afterward. Clementina became Duchess of Norchester only when the vows were complete, never before. She did not become less Elmhurst in spirit because her name changed after the wedding, when the final ownership papers had been completed and the long case was hers without qualification. Louis met Clementina in the East Clock Gallery. The walnut clock stood where it had stood since returning from Lewes. He did not have servants waiting with lifting straps. Where would you like it? He asked. Clementina looked at the clock, then at him. You have an opinion, several, and? I am suffering heroically in silence. She laughed. Come with me. They walked together to the breakfast room. Morning light fell into a shallow alcove near the eastern wall. Clementina stood there for a moment, imagining the walnut case against it, the clock visible, but not displayed like a trophy. Here, she said. Louis followed her gaze. Here, yes. His smile was quiet. Then here. Only after Clementina had chosen did experienced servants move the long case from the East Clock Gallery to the breakfast room alcove under her direction. The case was handled carefully. Nothing was removed. Nothing was damaged. The old split remained visible inside. The brass butterflies remained exactly where Elias Venn had placed them years before. A few mornings later, Clementina entered the breakfast room as Duchess of Norchester and found Louis already pouring coffee. The long case stood in the alcove she had chosen. "I still dislike those curtains," he said. Clementina looked toward them. "I selected them yesterday." Louis paused. "Then I have always admired them." She laughed and sat opposite him. Warmth from the fire misted one lens of her spectacles slightly. Clementina removed them, wiped both lenses with a clean handkerchief, and placed them open beside her breakfast plate. Louis watched without comment. She reached across the corner of the table and kissed his cheek. The gesture was hers, unasked and freely given. His expression softened. He turned one hand beneath hers, where it rested near his face. Clementina left her hand there and threaded their fingers together. "I love you," she said. "I love you too." Behind them, the long case began to strike 8. Clementina glanced toward the sound. The polished walnut appeared in 2 small reflections across the open lenses beside her plate. Once, she had been taught to remove those spectacles so other people might find her easier to look at. Once, Louis had decided she should be gone before breakfast. Now the clock stood where she had chosen to place it. Her spectacles rested where she chose to leave them, and Louis's hand remained beneath hers without closing around it until she closed her fingers first. The 8th stroke faded into the quiet room. No one asked her to leave.